Before we start, has everyone answered the first technically homework already? Yes, lahat? Kasi kinlose ko na yung form and I noticed meron 2 taong late nag-submit kasi our deadline was supposedly 12 noon today. Anyway, that's fine. Wala namang bearing kung late. So, is everyone here na? Not yet. Still 30 of us. Oh, wait lang. Let me just open the presentation. Can you see my screen? Yes? No?
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay, sige. Before we start, our topic today is Gothic architecture. Does anyone know anything about Gothic? Why do we even say Gothic? No idea for now. For now, it's fine. Wala tayong idea for now. So we'd leave the question as it is for now. But before we start, I'd like you to have a recall on your Romanesque era. Romanesque era? What are the major innovations in this period? Anyone?
Batteries po.
Sorry, sino yun?
Ako po.
Ay, si Shahana. Yes. Shahana, ano yung question natin? Major innovations during the Romanesque era. Shahana. Nakat si Shahana.
Ma'am, yung pong major innovation po ng Romanesque period po, yung buttress piers pier po. Tapos yung pong mas evident po yung paggamit nila ng tower po as campanile.
Well, towers in general, and yes, ginamit din nila yung tower bilang campanile. Anything else that you want to add? Yes, Mayan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon po, ma'am.
Yes po.
In addition po sa nabanggit po ni Shahana, yung floor plan po na ginagamit during this period po is yung Latin cross plan po, which is yung mas mahaba po yung isang part and mas maikli po doon sa may isang part po compared po sa mga parang basilica na form po nung mga dating mga period po, and yung circular and polygonal na plan po nung sa may nabanggit po natin dati.
Yung polygonal plans, to add lang kay May, is evident during the Byzantine era. Okay? Now, second question is, how do you compare Romanesque architecture to your Roman architecture? Anyone? Romanesque, compare it to the Roman era architecture? Sige, let's call on someone. Let's call on Leia May. Leia May, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes, Leia May, question. How do you compare your Romanesque era architecture to your Roman architecture?
Yung sa paggamit po ng use of colonnades po, ma'am, is they both have po yung, they both use po yung mga different, yung yung mga arches and vaults po, and also may mga ornamentation din po na similar po during the Roman architecture po.
Just to add to that answer, during the Roman era, mas madami yung ornaments, tapos medyo a little bit fewer on the Romanesque era. Last question, what is the best example of a Romanesque church? Paano mo malalaman na Romanesque yung isang church? One characteristic that would give away na ito ay isang Romanesque church. Anyone? Nag-raise hand si Aaron. Yes, Aaron.
Yung characteristic po ng Romanesque church is na evident is yung Latin cross plan nga po and yung towers, and yung living example po nito as of now is yung Pisa Cathedral po or yung Piazza de Miracoli.
That's one best example. Pero for me, if you would ask me, actually yung Latin cross, yes, kasi dito lang naman nagsimula yung mas evident na paggamit natin ng Latin cross plan. Pero if you would ask me, how would I know kung Romanesque era to tinayo or Romanesque church to? Remember when I told you last week na yung buttress piers ay dito lang lumabas? Tsaka kitang-kita siya from the outside kasi external siya eh. Kita mo siya sa external pa lang. Dadaan ka, uy, ano to, bakit may nakausling pader na parang poste na malaki? Which are actually your buttresses, di ba? Buttress piers. Last week, I told you about you will meet the buttresses again today. Right? So, let's move on. Here is a rundown of our discussion for Gothic architecture. It happened in most of Europe. It happened mostly in Italy, Spain, Germany, and France during the 11th to 16th century, 1050 to 1530. So, ang goal naman nito, actually, it's also known as style Ogivale. It's hero, yung third bullet. It should have been the first bullet, but anyway. It's also known as style Ogivale. Na anong ibig sabihin natin when we say Ogivale, Ogivale, Ogiwat? So, si Ogivale, I don't even know how to pronounce it. So, si Ogivale, it's actually, the ogives or ogives or OG. Yung ibig lang niyang sabihin is yung arc mo from somehow circular tip, nagiging pointed na siya eventually. That's exactly yung essence lang ng term. Hindi pa rin natin siya ma-pronounce. Anyway, so during the Gothic era, this is your medieval Europe. Imagine your, anong Disney film yung kay Notre Dame? The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Imagine the building, imagine the church there. That's an example of a Gothic era architecture. During the Gothic time, tatandaan yung motivation ng mga tao, Anong motivation natin sa early Christian? Anong motivation natin sa Byzantine? Anong motivation natin during the Romanesque era? And now, ang motivation natin kay Gothic era is that gusto nating abutin yung langit. At this point in time, sobrang tataas ng mga, well, as high as they possibly could construct at that time, given the level of technology that they have, level of building understanding or building methods and constructions that they have. So, as much as they want, as much as they could, wait, sorry, someone wants to come in. Gusto nilang pataasin yung mga building nila. So, habang pinapataas nila yung mga building nila, they added what we call a spire. Later on, you'll see what a spire is. Then eventually, kasabay ng pagpapataas nila, gusto nilang lumiwanag. Lumiwanag yung buong loob ng church per se or ng structure, basilica or cathedral. Nag-introduce sila ng what we call the flying buttresses. This one is a structural component which allowed na magkaroon tayo ng bigger windows kasi it doesn't take up much, unlike the buttresses piers or the buttress piers. And then another characteristic is now, dahil nga pinapataas nila, tatandaan nyo, ang motivation nila ay pataasin at paliwanagin. Kasi lahat ng ito, lahat ng pag-uusapan natin today, dun siya nakafocus, height and light. Yun yung keyword nyo. When you hear the words height and light, it's Gothic. So, yung pointed arches naman, it's allowed para mas maging matataas yung openings. 'Di ba? Whereas pag nakaganon lang siya, compared sa pag naka-point siya, that's another structural feature that they introduced. Also, the rib vaults, it also has another function, and your rose windows for light. So, all of these elements that we're introducing now, it's anchored to make your building higher and more, it could allow more light to come inside. So, next point is more evident use of stained glass. Bakit? Kasi nga, pinapaliwanag nila, and the more na lumiliwanag siya, to damper or para i-soften yung light. And then another decorative feature din kasi siya at that time, nag-iumpisa na tayo dun sa mas decorative faces, Hindi na siya yung simple like before. Dito tayo magsisimula na mas ornate na siya, mas detailed na yung kanyang mga designs and ornamentations and decorations inside. Another point is, yung mga murals niya or yung mga decorations niya sa loob would normally depict stories from the Bible. Later on in your Renaissance period, it's also the same. Remember the creation of Adam sa taas ng, yung mga murals sa taas ng Sistine Chapel and all. And another is facade faced west. Another correction pala last meeting, I've said this in the group chat kasi someone asked me. I might have gotten carried away. Pero yun nga, Byzantine started na naka-face na siya sa west. I mentioned this during the Byzantine lecture. I'm pretty sure I remember that. Na dito tayo magsisimula na lahat na ay nakatapat na sa west. From the east one, during your early Christian basilicas. Anyway, any questions so far?
None po.
Question? Yes, Paula, question?
None po, ma'am.
None. Questions, comments, wala naman. Anyway, so ina-assume natin na iintindihan ang lahat. Yes. Okay, moving on. Wait a minute. So these are your spires. Let me just move this one. Your spires, it's actually a building element on top of your highest point. Ang definition niya, ni Britannica sa kanya, it's a steeply pointed pyramidal or conical termination to a tower. In its mature Gothic development, the spire was an elongated, slender form that was a spectacular visual culmination of the building, as well as a symbol of the heavenly aspirations of pious medieval men. Remember, I told you a while ago, gusto na nilang abutin yung langit. During this era, gusto na nilang abutin yung langit. Gano'n ba kaya kataas? I think, I want to put a guess on what they're thinking na gano'n kaya kataas bago umarating yung langit? Which is exactly why they made buildings with tall towers, or they found a way to structurally make it possible para pataasin nila yung building height itself. And then they added these spires. So you have 4 types of basic spires that are evident during the Gothic era. You have the octagonal one. Nagva-vary lang naman siya kung ano yung mga faces niya. Ultimately, imagine it's a pyramid. Hindi man siya square pyramid, hindi man siya circular, conical what. Meron siya mga sides. It's polygonal pyramid siya. Lahat siya magto-terminate into a single point na mas mataas than your base. Question about the spire. An example of a spire. Very good example of a spire is this one in Barcelona, Spain. Your Barcelona Cathedral. You could just see this is an example of your Gothic architecture. Aside from the towers at the entrances, you have your pointed arches. Later on, we will discuss these types of windows, openings, and what so. You have your pointed arches and you have your spire, and it's a really tall spire. Yan. Any questions so far? Pwede ba nating i-consider yung gawa ni Gaudi? Do you know that? Do you even know Gaudi at this point?
Yes po, ma'am.
Yes. So, Antonio Gaudi is a Spanish architect. Meron siyang isang famous building na until now, several years, decades after his death, ay hindi pa rin tapos. Matuturing ba nating spire, yung napakataas na hindi pa natatayo hanggang ngayon?
Yes po, ma'am.
Yes. All right, sige. Anyone else? Question? None? So the spire is clear to you. That's one element that would tell you this building is Gothic. Tsaka remember, dito sa Gothic architecture, nagsimula yung ang dami na niyang tusok-tusok. Ang dami na niyang pointed elements. Very pointy siya. Very rigid siya, as I've mentioned before. Matigas yung visuals niya. It's heavy, sturdy, and pointy. Next element, as I've mentioned before, is your flying buttress. I think I might have shown you this the last week, this part of the slide while I was still doing it. So, this is your flying buttress. And these are your buttress piers. By moving the buttress piers outside at hindi na siya nakasandal sa wall, you allowed na magkaroon siya ng bigger windows or bigger areas for the windows kasi hindi na nakasandal sa wall yung support niya. By definition, a flying buttress is an arc that extends out from a tall stone, which is what we call a buttress. Stone wall is a flying buttress, an architectural feature that was especially popular during the Gothic period. The practical purpose of a flying buttress is to help hold up the heavy wall by pushing from the outside. Aside from support, it also serves as an aesthetic purpose. Ang function niya is, what structural subject or civil engineering subject are you taking now? Okay, basic physics. To every force or every motion, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So, kung nagbababa ng force from the vault, we don't even know the rib vault as of now, yung vault, yung downward force ng vault, kina-counter siya ng flying buttress. Tinutulak niya paloob to hold it together. At naka-anchor siya dito sa malalaking bato na to, masonry construction, which are your buttress piers or buttress piers. So dito, imagine this one, pushing this one inside. Habang itong vault mo, it's pushing downward, yung load niya. Clear so far? Clear so far? Hannah, clear? Julius, clear? Justin, clear? Sino pa? Pitch, is it clear?
Yes po, ma'am.
Yes pa naman. Ba't ka naka-off cam, Justin? Anyway, wait lang. Okay, may power interruption daw sa inyo. No, it's fine. Recorded naman yung session. Just make sure you will watch, okay? So, any question about your flying buttress? Ba't siya tinawag na flying? At bakit din siya tinawag na buttress? Essentially, it functions the same as your buttress piers, except for the fact that now, it doesn't take up your wall space. So, pwede ka pa magbintana. So, yun yung effect niya. Yun yung effect ng pag-add natin ng flying buttress. Gets so far? Everyone, nafa-follow naman? Yes?
Po.
Yes, thank you sa support. Justin, ikaw lang sumasagot. So, moving forward, ay, ang labo nung photo. I did not expect it to be malabo. Anyway, you have your copy of your visual dictionary. It's there. So, these are just the parts. For example, this one is called the pinnacle. This one is the flying buttress. If you can see, sinusupport niya yung load, you see the arrow. So, the load from the arc, from your pointed arc, goes to your buttress. Your buttress now transfers the load to your buttress piers. And now your buttress piers pushes it upward. Your flying buttress pushes it this way. And then pushes it inward. And then your habang nagpo-push naman outward ng load yung pointed arches. So structurally, it makes sense na tumaas yung building. 'Di ba? Before kasi curve lang yung arc ko. 'Di ba? Yung normal arc ko lang. Ngayon, from there, imagine tinaasan ko siya. Kung etong arc na to, ganito lang siya, oh. Ito lang yung bilog niya. So dahil ginawa natin siyang pointed, we allowed it to be higher. And in turn, we can make the structure higher. Ngayon, another purpose, dahil nga tinanggal natin yung buttress, itong malaking to, hindi na siya nakasandal sa pader, you allowed more window space here. So it's essentially brighter inside. Questions, comments, violent reaction so far? Wala naman. Sige. An example of your flying buttress, di ba sabi ko kanina, hindi lang siya structural. It serves as an aesthetic purpose then. This is the buttress at Chartres Cathedral. Can you imagine the intricate details that they have to construct? And this is just during the 11th century. Diba? 11th to the 16th century. Look at the details that they have to go through. And this one supports your entire building, your entire roof. It supports the roof above the building as well. Diba? Isn't it a little bit amazing? Diba? Nakakatuwa na at this point in time, they were able to do this. Makes you wonder bakit yung mga buildings and structures natin ngayon, konting lindo lang, nagkakadiferensya na. Diba? Kung kailan nagkaroon ng formal study on engineering and architecture, doon tayo nagkakaproblema. Anyway, so much for my sentiment, but that's beyond the point. So you see now, aside from the structural purpose that it serves, kasi it's a support, it also serves an aesthetic function. Okay? Another element, this is your Chartres Cathedral outside. See the flying buttresses, the spires, the rose windows, the towers. It's all there. You see, it's all there. Okay? This for me is the pinaka-basic example ng Gothic architecture. Like, pag nakita ko this is Gothic. Okay, next element of your Gothic architecture would be your pointed arc. See, by definition, it's just an arc with a pointed crown kasi it meets here at the top. So it eliminates the need for thicker columns. Again, kasi dito pa lang, kina-counter na niya yung load na binibigay sa kanya mula dito sa taas. And it adds height and space. Important, again, height and light. Okay, so this is the goal for Gothic architecture. Make the building higher so we can reach the heavens and make it lighter or make it brighter inside. So as not na hindi siya super depressing sa loob. And they added the stained glass as well on top of that. This is an example of your pointed arches. This is Saint Denis in France. You see the arches inside. You see the vault. So here, kita nyo, from here pa lang, from the ribs ng ating vault, kinikerry nila yung weight, kinikerry naman ni pointed arc pababa. Questions, comments, suggestions, violent reaction so far? None? Okay, we move on. See, may stained glass na din siya. Kita rin yung ribbed vault niya. Anyway, let's move on. Oh, now we're in the ribbed vault na. Ribbed vault or a ribbed vault is the same as your usual vault, except this time, meron na siyang skeleton. Meron na siyang additional support. Di ba before, what types of vault did we even talk about last week? Can you remind me? Can anyone remind me ano yung types ng vault na diniscuss natin last week?
Barrel vault po and groin vault.
Yes, barrel vault and your groin vault, or groin is also known as your cross vault kasi it's an intersection of two barrel vaults. So now your rib vault, well, it's basically a vault except now it has a skeleton of arches or ribs, which masonry can be laid down from. So dito, meron na siyang additional support. Support na agad yan eh, yung ribs na yan. This one helps carry the load of the roof towards your arches, down to your flying buttresses, down to your buttress piers, and down to the earth. Okay. Okay, this is famously incorporated in your Gothic cathedrals. Example or difference, comparison rather. This is your original cross vault. You only have yung groin. This is the groin, di ba? Yung intersection nila. Now you have another one. You have another rib. You have your transverse rib, which is your additional support sa gitna. You still have your diagonal rib, or what we called before the groin, and then it goes down here sa poste ng pointed arc, goes outside to your flying buttress, and it goes down to your buttress piers. Any questions so far? You could see by doing it this way, you're actually putting more height compared to if nakaganto lang yung vault mo. Okay, moving on. Yan. These are the parts of your ribbed vault. If you read the book that I gave you, it's there. So let's look at the plan. Your part of your where will I put this one? Part of your rib vault, you have here your diagonal rib. This one is your diagonal rib. You have your ridge rib, a horizontal rib marking the crown of a vaulting compartment. So let's look. It's your L and M. So etong dalawang to, the one that crosses, is your ridge rib. You have your boss here. It's an ornamental knob-like projection at the intersection of the ogives or ogives. I told you a while ago yung definition natin ng ogive. Diba? So dito siya sa intersection. Usually ornamented to, merong nakalagay dito. Let's go back. Yan o. Merong naka-ornament sa kanya. Here, look. Also at the beginning of our slide, see? They ornament the boss. They put an ornament sa boss. Okay, going back. Yan. Going back, next, you have your lierne, a tertiary rib in a vault, often for decorative rather than structural purposes. So, meron pang another, which is your lierne. This one. So, hindi na to structural, or more often than not, hindi na siya structural support, but a type of your, yung for decorative purposes na. And you have your tierceron, or a subsidiary rib, which connects a point on the ridge rib or central boss with one of the main springers or support. We have it here, your triceron. Any questions so far on the parts of your vault? Okay, we follow naman so far? All right, sige, let's move on. An example, this is, I told you this before, San Sebastian Church in Manila. Do you remember? I told you this when we were discussing on basilicas. Anong importance ni San Sebastian? Anyone na nakakatanda? We discussed this, I specifically mentioned San Sebastian Church before. Remember your minor basilicas? You have major and minor basilicas, di ba? Yes? Sige nga, let's try. Let's try as a review. Can anyone differentiate your minor and major basilica? Let's try Pitts. Pitts. Good afternoon. Pitts, are you there? Wala si Pitts. This is exactly why I want you to open your cameras. No, another person na lang. Let's try Clarice Bengson. Clarice, are you there?
Sorry po ma'am, di ko na po ganong maalala.
Hindi natin ganong maalala. That's an assignment for you. Alalahanin mo siya. Okay, anyone who can answer or help Clarice? Sige, let's try the last person who submitted her work. Mariel Joy Almoradi. Good afternoon, Mariel. Mariel, are you with us? Yes, you're with us. Mariel, I'd like you to help Clarice. What is the difference or the main difference of your major and minor basilica?
Po ako sure, pero ano po. Tingin po yung mga major basilicas po, yun po yung mga pinagtirahan po ng mga pope.
Yes?
Tapos yung mga minor basilicas po, ano po, ito po yung historical po sila, ganun po. Pero hindi po kagaya ng major basilica na mas ano po, mas historical po ganun.
Okay. Si major basilicas, we only have 4. Thank you, Mariel. We only have 4 major basilicas. Why? Kasi 4 lang yung tinirahan ng Pope, and these are the ancient agad. These are the earliest basilicas that we have. So, the ancient 4. Now, your minor basilicas are considered or granted the highest permanent designation of being a basilica because of historical importance, cultural importance, architectural significance, and so on and so on. May criteria sila. And I mentioned San Sebastian during the topic na basilica before because it's a minor basilica. I even sent you out a list. So why is it a minor basilica, you ask me? It's the first steel church in Asia. All steel church. Gawa siya sa bakal. Its style is actually neo-Gothic, neo being a revival of the Gothic era kasi bago siyang tinayo, hindi naman siya ng 16th century tinayo. It's recently compared to that. So, but still, it follows the style of the Gothic architecture. You see the rib vaults here. You see how it's how the arches are pointed. And you also have your rose windows. This is an example of a neo-Gothic or a Gothic structure here in the Philippines. This is in Manila. If you have time to visit, I'll be glad to tour you sa mga churches natin here. Anyway, moving on, I'm just showing you a ribbed vault. So here. Yeah, and this is a rose window. This is what we call the rose window. So, can anyone tell me what is the name of this church? None? Assignment niyo yan. Hanapin niyo kung anong church yan. Oo nga, assignment niyan. Hanapin niyo kung anong church siya. So this is an example also of your Gothic church or Gothic cathedral. You have your rose window. You have your flying buttresses here. You have a spire na hindi na nakuha sa picture. And you have your, we will talk about this later, these types of window later or decorative windows later in your French Gothic. Moving on, Gothic architecture or Gothic cathedral. Cathedral is now your main building type. It's a large place of worship and it's a principal church of a diocese or siya yung main sa isang lugar. Siya yung main church sa isang lugar. Example, Manila Cathedral, but this is your Chartres Cathedral in France. So these are the parts of your cathedral, basic parts of your cathedral. You have your rose window. You have your triforium. Your triforium is this one, yung parang mezzanine here. An arcaded story in a church between the nave arches and the clerestory. Your clerestory is here. You have your crypt here, an underground chamber. Your choir is now in the center. You have a lady chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary here. You have your altar here. And you have now your garth or a courtyard, also known as or also called as a cloister garth. Kasi this is your cloister. This is the walkway naman, arcaded walkway in your Gothic basilica or Gothic cathedral. Sorry, Gothic cathedral. Any questions, comments so far? Gets natin so far? Gets natin so far. These are just the parts naman anyway. You have to study this naman on your own since you have the book. So just be familiarized or be familiar or familiarize yourselves with the parts, the terms that we use now as we move forward. Okay? Now, moving on, your parts as well. You have number 1, you still have your narthex and towers. You have your nave and your aisles. Nave sa gitna, aisle sa gilid. You now have different ones. You now have your labyrinth. You now have your crossing. You now have your north transept and your south transept. So, dinivide na nila yung transept into two sides para lang mabigyan ng label. I'm assuming. You still have your choir. You still have your choir aisles, ambulatory, and your radiating chapels. You have mini chapels here. Usually this one, the number 4, this is your, what did we say a while ago? Lady Chapel. This is your Lady Chapel, the one that's dedicated. The biggest one, usually, is your Lady Chapel because it's the chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Following so far, everyone? Nagigets so far? Yes? Sige, let's give you 2 minutes to look at the photo and familiarize yourselves with the parts of a Gothic cathedral. By the way, this is a cathedral plan for the Chartres Cathedral in France. Madaming beses ko nang pinakita si Chartres Cathedral in this presentation so far. Okay?
Ma'am,
Yes, Paolo?
para saan po may labyrinth po, ma'am?
Para saan po yung labyrinth? That's a good question kasi ngayon ko lang din siya nakita. I mean, ngayon lang siya lumabas. In all the, meron ba niyan sa Byzantine era natin?
Wala po.
Meron ba niyan sa, ang tawag dito? Meron ba niyan sa early Christian natin?
Wala rin po.
Meron ba siya sa Romanesque natin?
Mas lalong wala po.
So, lumabas lang siya during your Gothic era. Lumabas lang siya during your Gothic era. Okay, your labyrinth actually, it's not a maze, it's just an open space here. Just an open space, usually sa gitna ng inyong, tawag dito, inyong nave. Wait, let me just, wait, someone wants to say something in the chat. Wait. Wala pong, oh, anyway, Paolo, to answer your question, your labyrinths are just deckers on the floor. It helps people, paano ba? Ang idea kasi ng labyrinth is to help people pray, meditate. I don't know how. Kasi it's drawn on the floor. Parang it's an open space. Meron akong movie na napanood eh. I'm not sure which movie. It talks about why you have a big open area sa gitna ng nave. And it's just to draw people. Parang to meditate, to pray. Yun yung naging main purpose niya. If it has other options or other purposes, I look into that kasi I did not put much thought into the labyrinth. It's just because I know na it's the purpose is just to draw people inside. Parang gusto lang niya na, oh, dito kayo kasi it's an open space, you're more welcome here. Parang ganun yung feeling niya. Initially, that's what I've read. Pero I look more into that kasi you gave me an interesting question today to answer. Pero I think I partially answered your question naman, Paolo, so far.
Yes po, ma'am.
Any more questions about the parts of your Gothic cathedral? Gothic cathedral? No. No questions on the parts. Additionally, Paolo, I remember, sa Gothic period, marami silang symbolism. Remember why they put the spires? Kasi we want to reach the heavens and why we thought of structural ways para paliwanagin siya. The Gothic labyrinth, it actually symbolizes daw, ang symbol naman niya is like the journey to a determined or predetermined destination that you follow. Kasi 'di ba, if you think of it, printed siya or naka-embed siya sa lapag. Para siyang the definition of a labyrinth is actually a maze ha. So para siyang alam niyo yung mga connect the dots na mga nasa like yung nasa paano ba? Nasa likod ng Nestle Chucky. Yung mga games for that, meron 'di ba mga connect or find the way to which one. So ganun yung thinking niya. You have your labyrinth, marami siyang lines din. It's actually what you think it is. It's a pattern of a labyrinth printed or incorporated in the floor that symbolizes that you will get to your destination. So they put much thought into their symbols now. So any questions, comments, suggestions so far? None so far. We move on. Another example of your Gothic cathedral is your Notre Dame in Amiens. This is not the Notre Dame na nasunog, ha? That one is in Paris. Okay. You have your parts here. I don't know if you can see or it's medyo mas maliit siya. But it's the same. You still have your nave, you still have your aisles. Oo nga, maliit siya. You still have your crossing and north and south transept. You still have your choir, this one. You still have your apse. You still have your ambulatory and your chapels. And this one is your Lady Chapel. Yun. This one, yung mga naka-project dito sa gilid are the buttresses. These are your buttresses. Dito naman siya. Nakakabit yung mga flying buttresses natin. Any questions, comments so far? You see here, this is your Notre Dame Cathedral. You see the towers. You see the rose window. You see two towers. You see the rose window. You see your pointed arches. And it has a small spire, but it's a spire nonetheless, and mini spires here. So it's what you will call a Gothic cathedral based on the elements that we discussed a while ago. Moving on. So ito ay parts of your cathedral. You see, lahat nung nandun sa likod ng plan nyo, yung mga nakausling ito, this is it, oh. Buttresses siya sa labas, kinakabitan siya ng flying buttress here. Do you see my pointer, where it's pointing at now? Yan. So, you have your parts of your cathedral. This is a section of your cathedral now. You have your arcade, your triforium, yung kanina nating sinabi. You have your clerestory. You have your flying buttresses outside. The numbers are here. You have your finials. Remember the term, it's finials or pinnacle. Siya yung mga para siyang spire, but it's here sa lower portion. Kasi the spire is usually the highest point. So you have your flying buttresses here. You have your buttress pier here. You still have your aisle and you still have your nave. Okay? So, any questions on your section so far? Okay, let's just take a scroll sa iba. Questions so far? None? None. All right, sige, let's move on. Yeah, let's move on. So, here, you have a comparison of your English Gothic and your French Gothic. Dito lang naman, in your English Gothic, nakahati lang siya into the stages. So, ito si early pointed, si middle pointed, and si late pointed. Dito nagkaroon ng mga slight deviations over time kasi haba noon, from 11th to 16th century, that's how many 100 years. So, nagkaroon lang ng a little bit of variation as we go along. That's your English Gothic for you. Your French Gothic naman, it talks of, remember the one I told you a while ago na yung windows ay may kanya-kanyang characteristic, yung itsura ng windows natin. So, this will fall into the French Gothic one. The French windows, okay? So, your early English part of your English Gothic, it uses lancet-shaped arc and plate tracery, also called as the lancet, first pointed, or early Plantagenet. It just means that this is the earliest type of your Gothic structure. So, hindi pa siya yung perfected Gothic. Andito ka pa lang sa baby steps into Gothic. You now have your tower sa gitna. A try on your spires. Your arches are there. Here. Your arches are still pointed. Here, your pointed arches. You still have your spires. Hinati lang natin siya. Kasi remember, ang haba ng era, mayroong mga developments later on. Now, you now have your decorated, the example that we put in here is the Worcester Cathedral. Now, we now have the decorated style. This is your middle, let me just move this one. This is your middle pointed. So it's now more geometric and curvilinear. We call it middle pointed or Edwardian or later Plantagenet. So you might confuse it with another architectural style, which is the Edwardian style. It's more or less the same, but it's now more geometrical. It's more curvilinear. And you now have better or richer tracery. Meron ka ng decor sa vault mo, unlike earlier na wala. And now you now have refined stone cutting techniques. What do we mean? Mas intricate na yung details mo. You see this one? You see, this is Westminster Abbey. Sino ang kilala yung taong kinasal sa Westminster Abbey? Wala? Wala kayong naalalang like royal event kasi kamamatay lang ni Queen? In 2011, I was studying back then. Dito kinasal si Will and Kate. Prince William and Kate, Duchess of Cambridge. So, you now have better, mas lighter na siya tignan. You could just take a look at the photos. This is more plain. Remember, this is the earliest part. And now you're more ornamented. So you're going into perfecting the Gothic style. You still have your towers. You still have your rose windows. You still have your pointed arches here and here. Your flying buttresses are more evident. You have your spire. You have your finials or pinnacles here. More or less it's the same, but it's better now in terms of ornamentation, in terms of how they did the building. Kasi eventually, as you go along, meron kang natututunan. Meron kang nai-incorporate na bagong building technique. And this is what allowed them to improve on the Gothic architecture. Ang haba niya, it's one of the longest ones in our history. Now, we now have the perpendicular. This is your late pointed period. Let me just move it here. It's rectilinear and also known as Lancastrian. It now has perpendicular tracery. Another important addition during your late pointed or your perpendicular era sa inyong English Gothic ay nagkaroon na tayo ng fan vaults. And you have better intricate stonework. You can see here, these are your stoneworks. It's much more detailed than the one that we had a while ago. You still have your tower, you still have your spires, you still have your pointed arches, and your finials and buttresses here. Now, ano yung nadagdag dito sa perpendicular? Ano yung pinaka naging highlight niya? This is our fan vaults na. It's an improvement or a variation of our vault, our rib vault. It looks like this one. Yan. So I put in here your basic example of fan vault, and this is how it will look like. This is in Peterborough Cathedral. If you fly frequently, does anyone here fly frequently? In Puerto Princesa, PPS Airport, meron parang gantong fan vault na decor sila sa ceiling. I don't know why and I don't know how. Pero siya yung determining image na pag nakita mo siya, ay nasa Puerto Princesa siya. So yun. Google that. Actually, I'll Google it for you. I might have a picture, Puerto Princesa. Naglagay sila ng fan vault inspired ceiling, and this is here. Yung dalawang payong niya. I sent it in our group chat. Can you check now? So just another info or nugget of information lang naman. Wala naman siyang connection sa pinag-uusapan natin now. Pero the important thing for you to remember here is this happened a long time ago, but now it's incorporated into a relatively modern airport. 'Di ba? Ibig sabihin, hindi useless na inaaral natin siya ngayon. Ibig sabihin, there's some things that we can pick up from the previous era or the previous architectural movements or styles na pwede nating incorporate now. That's the point of me showing you PPS Airport. Okay? So moving forward, any questions, comments, suggestions, violent reactions? Ang bilis naman ni Ma'am magsalita. Or everyone is following now? Yes? Thumbs up if you understood our lesson today because we're almost done. Yes, so far? Yes. Yes. All right, sige. Moving on. Ito yung French Gothic natin, the one that I'm telling you about. Ganito lang siya kasimple. You just have to remember, you have 3 types of your French window. You have your Allen set, your rayonnant or rayonnant, and then your flamboyant style. So, anong difference nila? 3 stages din siya like your English Gothic. Nag-evolve din yung itsura ng French window natin. This one, you have your pointed arc with a circular window here. Meron kang geometric traceries here. Your rayonnant is a little bit more intricate than that. So you have your wheel tracery and your circular windows and your wheel tracery. Now, your flamboyant style, you now have your flame-like tracery. Very easy to spot. Very easy to spot the differences actually. The flamboyant style, you can't go wrong. Pag nakita mo siyang mukhang apoy siya na yon. But for these two, madali mo siyang madi-differentiate kasi if it appears to be simple or medyo mas simpler, safe to assume na it's an Allen set rather than a rayonnant. Get so far? Get so far. Okay. An example of your Gothic cathedrals is your Salisbury Cathedral and your Ulm Cathedral. You see the spires? Na perfect na nila, na ang taas na nung spire. You also have your pinnacles or your finials here. You have your buttresses here. You have your pointed arches and your French windows. And you still have your tower here. Similarly, with Ulm Cathedral, spire, towers, flying buttresses, finials, basically that's about it sa exterior na makikita natin. So any question, comments so far? Recap, again, when we say height and light, it just means nasa Gothic architecture ka. Remember your keywords? Height and light, heightening and lightening, progressive heightening and lightening of your buildings is the aim of your Gothic architecture. Additional innovations or mga elements na na-introduce during this period are your spires, your flying buttresses, your pointed arches, your ribbed vaults, and your rose window. Gothic architecture is also known as style ogival or ogivale. More evident use of stained glass. Again, dahil pinaliliwanag natin siya. Decorations are from stories in the Bible, Latin cross plan, and your facade still faced west. Questions, comments, suggestions, violent reaction? None. So you can answer me now. You can answer me now. Number 1 question. What are the new innovations in this era? Siguro naman kaya na nating mag-recite dahil kakasabi ko lang. New innovations in this era and give one na lang. Give one and explain kung ano siya. Sige, let's start. Tapos ikaw na ang magtawag ng kaklase mo. I'll call on someone. I'm calling on your class president, Shahana. Shahana, you start. Shahana.
Good afternoon po.
Yes, good afternoon. Shahana, please start. Give us one
po?
innovation from this era and explain.
Ano po? Spires po.
So what
Ano
are
po siya? Ginawa po, yun po yung parang pa-cone po na patusok. Tapos ginawa po siya kasi ang symbol daw po nun is maabot daw po yung langit. Or para daw po mas malapit sa langit po.
that's one? I remember a story about the Tower of Babel. Ginawa nila yun. Sorry, this is a Bible story about the Tower of Babel, kung bakit tayo nagkaroon ng different languages. Ginawa nila yon so they can reach God or they can reach the heavens. Tapos, they were very, I think at that time, marami ng, aside from they're very sinful, prideful na rin yung mga tao. So, in-struck down yung tower and then binigyan sila ng iba-ibang languages para hindi sila magkaintindihan. Something like that. But if I remember it correctly from my Sunday school. Anyway, Shahana, can you call on one of your classmates?
Si Mayan Badahos po.
Good afternoon, Mayan. I hope you're fine and I hope your signal's
Hello po,
fine.
ma'am. Yes po,
Yes.
ma'am. Good afternoon po.
Good afternoon. May I ask, can you give us one innovation and explain?
Yung isa po sa mga innovation po, aside po dun sa mga spars na nabanggit, is yung flying buttresses po. Unlike po nung sa previous na sa Romanes po na buttresses na nakakabit po siya sa may mismong wall, kaya mas maliit po yung mga windows. Dito po sa era na to is nakahiwalay po siya sa mismong building pero nagsusupport pa rin po siya sa mismong structure. Bale, sinusuportahan niya pa rin po yung weight ng building pero yung pag-support po niya is nag-a-allow po na magka-create pa rin ng mas malaking windows at yun nga po, yung isa sa mga goal nila is papasukin yung light dun sa loob ng church
Yes.
po.
Sige. May Ann, dahil gusto mong mag-run for honors, can you call on one of your classmates, please?
Pa-
Can you call on your favorite classmate?
Si Aaron Bautista po, ma'am.
Aaron ulit. Aaron, favorite ka ni May Ann. So, give us one more innovation before we move on. Aaron, sir, are you there? Yun.
Hello po, ma'am.
Yes, hello din, sir.
I think nasabi naman na po nila yung
Uy, madami pa.
majority.
Madami pa. Dalawa lang sinabi nila.
I think yung new innovation po dito is sa part po ng plan nila sa Basilica. Nag-associate po sila ng Lady Chapel at dun po sa ambulatory dedicated for Virgin Mary. And naglagay din po sila sa some structures ng cloister or in other words, courtyard. And
Okay.
yun nga po, yung nasabi niyo po kanina na labyrinth na nag-symbolize ng isang maze na nagdo-draw ng attention to people para mag-gather inside.
Sige. I'll just correct one thing that you said. Pero everything was right. One thing, your ambulatory is your daanan sa likod. It's not the chapel that's dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Yun yung Lady Chapel. Doon ka dadaan for you to get to the Lady Chapel. Okay, any questions so far? Bago ako naman yung magtanong ng number 2. Sige, second question is, how is this different from the previous discussions that we had? Meaning, ano yung difference ng Gothic architecture than the ones that we had? Remember one of the important things why I'm saying this to you, bakit ko laging tinatanong kung bakit early Christian yung tawag, bakit Byzantine yung tawag, bakit Romanesque, hindi ko pala natanong kung bakit Gothic yung tawag. Bakit Gothic yung tawag? Sige. You answer me that next week, Another is, sorry, your second question pala is, how is this different from the previous discussions that we had? Aaron, tawag ka ng favorite classmate mo. Aaron?
Si Mariel Calaranan po.
Si Mariel. Mariel, tinuro ka ni Aaron.
Yes po.
Yes po. Ready
For
naman.
for number 2 po, ang difference po ng Gothic architecture from the previous architecture po is katulad po ng mga new innovations po na nabanggit kanina. Meron na po siyang flying buttresses kasi po meron po silang team na para mas maabot po yung langit and para mas maliwanag. Then nag-giveaway po yung flying buttresses para ma-achieve po nila yon. Kasi mas nakakapag ano po sila ng anong bintana kumpara po sa Romanesque architecture na limited lang po yung space for bintana kasi may buttress po sila sa walls. Then yung sa spires naman po, kapag di ba po kanina nasabi nyo kapag nakita nyo yung isang church na may pointed, alam mo na agad Gothic po to, ganun po. Then may, po yung sa rib vaults po, highly decorated po yung ganun nila yung mula sa dome na naging patusok yung yung gitna ay yung basta ganon, naging highly decorated po. Basta po, ganun po, ma'am.
Sige. Pero gets ko naman. Feeling ko naman naintindihan din nila. So, different talaga si Gothic natin, Mariel. for the fact na at this point in time, hindi na nila kailangan yung katulad nung early Christian era na kailangan nila mag-survive at humanap ng lugar. Hindi na katulad during your Byzantine era na kailangan nila mag-spread, kailangan nila maghakot ng tao. Hindi na rin siya tulad nung time na nung Romanesque natin na you feel na I think one of the aim of your Romanesque architecture was to make the people feel God's presence actually, na secured sila and all dahil sa tibay ng structure. So now, dito sa Gothic, the motivation that they had was gusto na naming umangat. Ganun na siya. And hindi mo rin naman mistake yung Gothic structure from others kasi merong mga unique distinguishing characteristic yung Gothic architecture. And that's a question for number 3. So, question number 3, define in your own words, not mine, how you will distinguish a Gothic structure. Marielle, can you call on your favorite classmate, please? Marielle.
Si Joyce po.
Si Joyce. Joyce. Dito ba si Joyce? Parang wala si Joyce, Marielle. I think she's one of those that messaged me tas hindi ko pa ma-open.
Si Jessica na lang po.
Si Jessica. Jessica, tinuro ka ni Marielle. Jessica, good evening. Are you here? Jessica. Wala din si Jessica, Marielle.
Si Edralyn na lang po.
Pagod ka na? Si Edralyn na lang po. Edralyn, are you here? Parang wala din si... Ay, hindi. Dito si Edralyn. Edralyn. Yes.
Opo, ma'am. Ma'am, nadidinig po.
Yes. Nadidinig ka
Ma'am,
namin
andito
pero
po.
medyo putol.
Ma'am, nadidistinguish ko po yung isang Gothic structure kapag po yung nakita, yung nasabi nyo nga po kanina, yung mga spires nila po, sobrang mahaba kasi nga po yung height and light. Opo, ayun. Tapos yung po yung mga towers nila, yung rose windows po, and then yung mga pointed po yung arches nila na may ornamental thing sa bandang center po.
Yun lang, Edralyn?
Opo, ma'am.
Yes, sige. Kung ako naman ang tatanungin nyo, tama naman si Edralyn, pero kung ako ang tatanungin nyo, in my opinion, paano ko masasabing Gothic siya? Di ba kanina sabi ko sa inyo, masasabi kong Romanesque siya pag may buttress pier siya kasi siya lang naman yung meron. Or sa kanya nagsimula ang buttress pier. Si Gothic architecture, I would say, masasabi kong Gothic siya pag patusok siya palagi. Alam mo yun, marami siyang pointed finials. And aside from that, kailangan meron siyang kapartner na may flying buttresses siya. So that's for me is the distinguishing characteristic ng isang Gothic structure. But of course, you have to incorporate everything that we studied today. So, may bonus question ako. Hindi ko to sinabi sa buong discussion. I wanted to know if anyone has read. My bonus question is, you get this right, you get an additional 3 points in your final grade. So, the question is, how do you call the statue or ornaments that were introduced during the Gothic era, which made us associate Gothic churches with horror movies? Very very Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Oh my God, may dalawang nag-raise, tatlong nag-raise ng hand. May pitong nag-raise ng hand, 8. Paano ako mamimili? Sige. Sorry, yung naunang nag-raise ng hand na lumabas sa screen ko, hindi ko alam kung pare-parehas tayo ng lumabas. Ang unang nag-raise ng hand was si Limpangog Leslie sa screen ko. Sige, Leslie. Don't lower your hands. Baka mali si Leslie. Let's try. Leslie.
Pwede po try lang po. Pwede po ba yung dalawang answer? Hindi po ako sure eh.
Hoy, ang grabe ka naman. Isa lang. Isa lang. Pag mali.
Sige po, isa na lang po.
Sige.
Since yung keyword po is horror movies, ang answer ko po is, ulit yun? Gargoyles po.
Grabe naman. Sige. Actually, correct. Gargoyle. So, Leslie, I will just write in my notes na ikaw yung makaka-plus 3. Kahit ngayon ka lang nag-recite. Sorry, Leslie. Bakit, Leslie? Defend mo yung answer mo.
Ma'am, yung sa keyword po na horror movies, tuwing nanonood po kasi ako ng mga parang yung mga late 90s horror movies na may theme po na vampires, yung mga pinapakita pong buildings, like mahal tulad po sa Gothic architecture, yun po yung mga pinapakita parang may mga demon-like structures or statues na may wings po, parang ganun po.
Sige. Yung sa mga naka-raise pa ng hand, let me just get your names. At iisa-isahin ko pa rin kayo. So, si Micaela, si Shahana, si Manansala Evita, si Aaron, si Edralyn, who else? Si Mayan, and Leia May. Siya lang, no? Kayo lang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8 people. 8 people raise their hand. Sige. Meron ba sa inyong iba yung sagot aside from the gargoyle? Wala. Lahat kayo gargoyle yung sagot? Grabe. Sige. Pero tama naman. Gargoyle naman talaga yung tamang sagot. Ngayon, since you were all raising your hand dahil mabait ako today, sama na din natin kayo. Pero hindi 3, 2 lang. Plus 2 lang. Anyway, kung meron pa rin makakasagot ng susunod kong tanong, just to make sure na nag-aral kayo, anong purpose ng gargoyles natin? Panakot lang talaga siya, ganon?
Ma'am,
Yes, Mayan. Yes,
Ma'am.
Mayan. Maging plus 3 ka. Dali.
ma'am, base po sa sa may book po na
Yes.
binigay niyo, ang meaning po kasi niya is doon po lumalabas yung tubig na
Yes.
doon po nakalagay po kasi siya sa upper part ng mga building o kaya ng roof, at doon po lumalabas yung tubig para hindi po ma-damage yung mismong masonry po nung pagkakatayo po ng building.
Agree. Nag-aaral si May. O, sige na. Di plus 3 ka na. Sino pa? Meron pa bang other function yung gargoyles?
Ma'am,
Architectural po ba or
Yes, Shahana.
Ma'am, meron pa daw, yung isang symbol daw po niya is yung para daw po ma-ward off daw po yung mga evil spirit, ganun po.
Technically, Shahana, yes. Architecturally, hindi siya yun. Pero, actually, come to think of it, that's actually one of the reasons, no? That's one of the reasons kasi remember yung premise ng mga scarecrow ay para manakot. So, ganun din siya. Para siyang guard. Para siyang guard nung structure. Tapos, sige, next question is, for another chance dun sa iba, ano yung ibig sabihin ng gargoyle? I mean, what do you even mean when you say gargoyle? Ano yung literal meaning niyang gargoyle?
Throat po.
Shahana, sabi ko iba eh. Teka nga. Mag-lower hand ka na nga. Anyway,
Hello po.
yes, Aaron.
I think kung sa perspective po ng architecture, yun nga po yung sa spouts or sa gutter. Kung sa perspective naman po ng sa mga horror films, parang yun po yung tinatawag na horror creatures nga po na pantakot sa mga viewers, ganun po. And yung naalala ko rin po sa mga series na napanood ko is may parang chamber po sila doon na parang nandun po yung mismong gargoyle na king na tinatawag. Kaya yun po.
Gargoyle king.
Basta panakot.
Anyway, thank you, Aaron. I lower your hand na. Micaela, do you want something to add?
kahit po mag-add naman ako, andun naman din po kasi yung pinaka-point. Actually po, kaya ko po alam yung gargoyle dahil po sa book ng The Hunchback of Notre Dame, parang
Yes.
parang nabasa-basa ko siya and then parang na-curious nga po ako sa itsura ng gargoyles na yun. Yung church po kasi doon, parang may mga statwa po ng kings na pag ando ka sa harapan, parang sa ano lang po yun, parang sa animated din po and sa book. Parang pinagbabasihan po kasi yung dalawa yung pinagkaiba po kung ganun po ba talaga yung itsura. Ang ano po talaga ng gargoyles is parang sila yung bantay
Yes.
doon sa church hindi lang po sila panakot, parang sila po yung nagga-guard ng church, ganun po.
Yes, that's one actually. Yun yung parang, di ba sabi ko, mahilig nga sila sa symbolism. So that's another symbolism. So meron pang tatlo na biglang nag-lower ng hand nila, Evita, Edrelyn, and Lea May. Do you have anything to add? Yes, ang dami nilang plus 3 today, hindi na sila kakabahan.
Yes po. Maingay po ba dito?
Hindi, pero naririnig ka namin, Evita. Yes, Evita.
Ano po? Nasabi na rin po kasi nila ano po, yung gargoyles po kasi, madalas ko po rin naririnig po yan ng mga napapanood ko po na fantasy anime, ganun po. Ano po siya, nag-guard po siya sa taas po ng mga churches, mga buildings po, ganun. Yung sa mga napanood ko po anime, sa mga buildings po siya nakaupo. Tapos po, ano po siya, parang camera po siya na, pinaghalo pong tao, tsaka po animal po yung itsura, ganun po.
Yeah, medyo human. Minsan, I might have seen it in one church habang nagsa-scroll ako. Human body, tas animal head siya. Ang weird. Anyway, yun nga, tama lahat. Architecturally, ang function niya, sige, si Edrelyn and si Lea May gustong i-add?
Ma'am, wala na po. Nasabi na po nila.
Nag-give up na lang siya. Hindi, sige, dahil dalawa na lang kayo, di meron din tayong plus 3 for the both of you kasi I think naman, so this is just one way for me to test kung nagbabasa din kayo at in advance, pero parang nahulaan nyo. Dahil sinabi ko na ginagamit siya sa horror movie. Anyway, moving on. Ang function talaga niya is para siyang weep hole. So, yung tubig talaga, yun talaga yung main function niya, architecturally speaking. Pero dahil nga mahilig sila sa symbolism, another symbolism that could fit very well in that scenario ay para magbantay nga sa building, to ward off the evil spirits or what. Pero that's actually one of the symbols for strength din nila. So I think it's from a word that means truth. I forgot which word, pero gargoyle din yung spelling niya. Ang spelling niya, iba lang yung spelling niya, pero it's still pronounced as gargoyle. So yeah, it's also pronounced as gargoyle. So, yun nga, tama naman lahat ng sinabi natin tonight, and I think na natabi naman natin or may takeaway naman tayo from tonight's lecture on Gothic architecture. Kasi kung meron kayong questions, comments, suggestions, or violent reaction, now is the time to raise your hand and let me know. Walang questions, so naintindihan natin lahat. Yung groupings and yung group work, I will just send later kasi kakabigay nyo lang sa akin. And kung merong hindi nakapagsagot ng first assessment, you let me know. Okay, so for next week, our topic is, wait lang. I think our topic is Renaissance na. No, let me just check if I have the right topic on hand. Wait a while. Our topic next week is Renaissance architecture. Yes, I'm correct. It's Renaissance architecture. After Gothic is Renaissance, before your midterms. We have 2 weeks for Renaissance, 1 week for Renaissance, and then your midterms. Or make it 2 weeks, depende kung gaano kahaba natin siya matatapos. Okay? Your assignment for next week, please read. Wala na nga kayong plate. Magbabasa na lang kayo, guys. Magbasa na kayo, please. Read on the famous architects of this era. Your second assignment is research on the architects that worked on St. Peter's Basilica. Remember, I might have told you, since it's one of the major basilicas that we discussed before, meron siyang, I think, 13 architects who worked all together for this. Different parts, different time, different additions to the building. You compile that, and you give that to me in PDF form, 1 page, 2 page, something like that. Just give it to me. Kasi you will use that until your board exam review kasi lumalabas siya sa board exam, mga ate at kuya. So you give that to me. That's a research work that you have to give to me. It's not graded, but I would appreciate if you know and if you could submit to me para lang may record tayo of who's doing what or who's doing the class participation or what. Third is you identify the importance of this era to the modern times. So, i-incorporate naman natin, di ba? Your basilica from your early Christian one, it's still the basilica that you have today. It's the prototype of the basilica that you have today. So from your Romanesque naman, from your Byzantine naman, you have all sorts of innovations that they gave you. You have your doceret, you have your other things. You have different types of plan actually from them. From your Romanesque naman, you have your reuse of your arc and vault and your dome. Dito rin tayo nag-start magkaroon ng other important features na up until this day ginagamit natin. And lastly, for today's discussion, your Gothic architecture, we still use it today. We still use the spires today. We still use the towers today. We still, very evidently now, we use the stained glass today. And sometimes you use that stained glass to depict the photos or the stories in the Bible. Remember, merong churches na kada entrances nila may stained glass sa taas na nagde-depict ng Stations of the Cross. May mga ganun. So, from then until now, all the things that we're studying right now, nagagamit pa rin natin. It's still very usable now. So, hindi siya something na pwede nating wag bigyan ng pansin or i-let go na lang basta-basta. Kasi this is actually an interesting subject. Don't forget, guys, your assignment for next week. So any question, comments, suggestion, reaction, violent reactions on tonight's discussion? Quality of discussion, flow of discussion, the information, and the learnings that you got tonight? No questions so far? No questions? If no questions, I think that's about it. That is our discussion for tonight. And yeah, 25 na lang yun nandito from kaninang 30. Grabe kayo, guys. Anyway, yun lang. I hope you enjoyed the discussion tonight, and I will see you guys next week for another discussion on Renaissance architecture. Thank you and have a nice night. Bye, guys.
Bye po, ma'am.
Yo.